Every time you read a great book, it's easy to believe the author behind it is some unbelievable creative genius who operates on a completely different level compared to your average human being. But the truth is, behind every good book is a real person, a real human being. Someone with doubts, strange ideas, messy experiences, wild stories, and a life that shaped every page they wrote. So, welcome to Authors by Us, the podcast where we go beyond the book. Here we sit down with authors not just to talk about what they wrote, although we will talk about that, but about the stories, experiences, opinions, and moments that shape them into who they are today. By the end of the conversation, we want you as the audience walking away feeling like the author you once admired from a distance can now be one of your closest friends that you could now grab a cup of coffee with. So if you love books, stories, or the people behind them, make sure to hit subscribe and let's meet today's author. It's a pleasure to have you on, Miss Watson, J.A. Watson. What's your first name, by the way? What's the
I just
J.A.
go by
stand for?
JA. I just
J.A.?
go by JA. That's my author handle.
Okay, okay. Um, well, welcome to the podcast. I want to start right off the bat by asking, where should we start? How about this? You're currently 20 years old, you're in college. Who were you before A Race Against Shadows existed? And who are you now that it does exist?
Wow. That's actually a pretty tough question because when I started writing Race Against Shadows, I was in 8th grade. And that was a few months before COVID started. So it came with me through the pandemic and through the transition from middle school to high school, and then the transition from high school to college too, because it took me 5 years to write it. And so I've definitely evolved as a writer because I've been reading more, and also just as I was writing and as I was learning my particular style of writing, uh, I was really evolving on that front. But I know that I have also evolved as a person as I've grown from a 15-year-old to 14-year-old to uh, a 20-year-old now. I'm more mature. I have a better understanding of the broader context of everything that's going on, and especially some of the topics that my book touches on too. I have a more nuanced understanding of how I'm writing that and how the characters are interacting with the story.
Interesting. You talked about you were in eighth grade when you initially started writing the book. Tell us about your journey that led to this point because I don't see many eighth graders deciding to write a book, if any at all. So, so what's that journey like?
Gosh, so I was one of those kids who was reading books left and right when when I was younger, especially in elementary school. I was always ahead of my reading level and all of that. And I read a lot of fantasy, and the more I read, the more I kind of got this itch to create something of my own. And so my first long story was actually in 4th grade, and because that was the creative writing class, and we got a prompt, and it was something like, "You wake up and you're green." And I was like, "Yes, let's do a multiverse portal fantasy about dragons." Um, so that was kind of the first, because I kind of kept writing little short stories in that sort of thread of a story, and so that was the first kind of long story that I had created. And then in 5th grade, I wrote my first book, and it's that one's long gone now. But throughout the years, I would just, like I said, I just had this inexplicable urge to create something. But my problem was that I would have trouble maintaining motivation to complete projects. Like every time I would figure out where one of my projects was going to go, I kind of got bored with it. And I wouldn't continue with it. So by the time I got around to 8th grade, I decided I'm going to start something and I am going to take it through until the end. Like, this is something that I'm going to commit to. And I did. So,
Hmm.
yes, I finally managed to figure out the formula. And one of the things that I did was I commissioned artists to draw my characters, which not only gave me a visual for the story that I was creating, but also it kind of got to the point where I had sunk so much money into it. It was like, well, I can't really, give up now. This is an investment at this point.
Looking back then, there had to be something in your life that caused that creative itch, because we're going back years at this point, from where you are now at 20 years old all the way back to when you were in 4th grade. That is quite the jump, and obviously you've only grown as a creative, in this case as an author. But what do you think deep down was the true thing that caused that creative itch? Because, again, and maybe you can say it was just imagination as a child, but I feel like, especially for someone that young, to get the itch to write a story, there's a deeper meaning there that caused you to have this, we'll call it, unbelievable creative itch.
Um, so my parents had me watching, especially my dad, because he's also a big nerd like I am. They introduced me to fantasy stories like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Marvel and all of that when I was very young. And I think I just resonated with those stories. I thought they were very cool. Um, I also had a deep love for the show on PBS called Jane and the Dragon, which I've actually had the opportunity to interact with the author of the original books on TikTok, which was really cool because his I think the TV show that they made from his books, I used to watch it when I was like 4 years old. And that kind of instilled in me a love of the fantasy genre and dragons in particular, because I'm a huge dragon nerd. I mean, I'm wearing a Smaug shirt right now. So that honestly, like I think going that far back, Jane and the Dragon might actually be responsible for where I am today and creating my own fantasy book.
You are a giant fan of dragons, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Marvel. Were all of these things initially a inspiration for you when you were on the journey of writing A Race Against Shadows, or did any of these come into play as you were 5 years deep into it?
I definitely works like Lord of the Rings have had a huge influence on the general feel of my book because my book's epic fantasy. It takes place in its own world. It's got this adventure aspect to it. It's also got this, there's this ancient and powerful weapon that could be detrimental to the future of society. So that's sort of a similar premise and a similar vibe because I do dearly love those those books and those movies. And I definitely Star Wars too. Star Wars comes, especially the original trilogy, the inspiration from Star Wars comes into play, particularly in the dynamics between my characters. And because I have a found family dynamic between three characters, and one of them's got magic, and then there's a bit of a third wheel situation going on and stuff like that. And there's definitely there's a chapter where in a single chapter in A Race Against Shadows, there are three Star Wars references that I consciously made. So if anyone wants to read that and try to figure out what those are, uh, message me. But so yeah, and also I was reading at the time that I was writing the book. I was also reading works like Dune, and I was watching Game of Thrones, and all of these all of these things that I think have kind of come together as a collective to not only shape my idea of the story, but also shape who I am as a writer. Because I've always asserted that the reason why I am an excellent writer is because of how much I read as a child. Because unfortunately, our education system kind of just teaches you what subject or what, like, yeah, subject and predicate is for like 4 years, and then they just drop grammar completely after that. And so I thought that that was always really lacking. So all of my knowledge of, how to use em dashes and how to use semicolons and how to use complex sentence structure pretty much came from just reading.
Yeah, you're not wrong about the whole school system in regards to that. It's pretty wild. But as someone who was such an avid reader and you claimed you were above grade for the most part as you were growing up and reading, what were some series that you just couldn't put down as a child, especially because I mean, there's probably the obvious ones that we've talked about a little bit so far with ones like Lord of the Rings and so on and so forth. But were there any series that you just couldn't put down because as a child, attention spans are a bit of an issue? So I would assume that in order for you to truly become an avid reader from such a young age, there had to be some series out there that just hooked you and you couldn't stop reading it. For example, for myself, it was Harry Potter as a kid.
That's a
So
good one.
do you have any of those that you were just addicted to almost?
I think The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, that was fundamental to me as a big fan of dragons. The Also, got really obsessed with the Percy Jackson books in middle school, so Canon Event. Uh, Also, some of the foundational series that are responsible for pretty much my entire personality as it is now are the Warrior Cats books and the Wings of Fire books. And those just those books were basically just Game of Thrones for kids when you really think about it. But they were my introduction into very, very long-winded storylines that you could kind of just keep going with, and it was fascinating how they put it together. And I know that Warrior Cats has kind of gotten a little convoluted at this point, but particularly the first 3 arcs, that those will always have a special place in my heart.
So you started reading those at a young age, and then over time, eighth grade rolls around, you decide, I'm going to write this book. And then you spend another 5 years working on it. What did that writing process look like from an eighth grade student's perspective, all the way until eventually 5 years later, you would have been finishing up high school, maybe about a year into college almost?
Yes, I published my first semester in college, and I'm I'm a pantser, so I don't really lot, because like I mentioned before, once I figured out where this story would go, I'd kind of get bored with it. And I think
Mhm.
the discovery process of being a pantser and like discovering this story as the characters are discovering this story is what keeps me engaged. Now, that's been a little bit more difficult with trying to write the sequel because now I have to worry about continuity. But the it was pretty much it was a lot easier when I was in middle school and high school to find extra time because I would write before I went to bed. And I college has been a lot more draining, so it's been a lot more difficult to find time outside of my schoolwork to actually be able to sit down and work on something. But there really was no routine with it. And then it was a special case with COVID because then all of a sudden I had all this time. Just so much time. School was weird. Summer was weird. You couldn't do anything during the summer. So I just sat down and I was able to get a lot of progress done on the first draft of the book while COVID was happening. But yeah, that's now it's kind of it's always been kind of an opportunistic sort of thing. Like, oh, I have time now. Let me try to work on this.
We talked about the fact that you are in college. You're currently working towards an engineering major. I want to get your thoughts about the two sides of one coin. And what I mean by that is you are majoring in a degree that is all about all things technical for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other side of the coin, you have a book that's about gods, witches, fays, all the just the most in dragons, all the most insane fantasy things you can think of. Do you think that engineering, I know you said you haven't been able to find much time in writing, but the time that you have been able to spend writing, do you think engineering has helped you in some way, shape, or form when it comes to being able to formulate your thoughts and the words that you're putting on the page?
Yeah, actually, it has. So, the big thing about engineering is problem solving. That's the most important soft skill that an engineering degree instills in you. And that's what makes a degree like that so versatile and so applicable to so many situations. And I think, particularly while writing the second book, because I kind of backed myself into a corner with some details that I wrote into the first book where I was like, this is going to be a future me problem. And now it is future me. So now it is my problem. But, and so there were a couple of things where I kind of just had to sit there and just think about how to problem solve my way out of the situation. And if I didn't have those skills being, if I wasn't working on those skills anyway as part of my degree, I'm not sure if I really would have been able to figure that out because that's a very specific thought process to be able to identify a problem you have,
Mhm.
brainstorm solutions, work through those solutions to see if they work and then tweak as needed. I mean, that's the engineering design process basically.
And so, with engineering helping you in some way, shape, or form when it comes to problem solving and all of that, obviously you are very focused right now on college. That takes up the majority of your time, but when you do find time to write, how much more efficient does that make you then? Or do you still feel like there's that part of you that just almost hits a brick wall when you're in the middle of writing this next book?
Oh gosh, I've actually been at a brick wall
Mm,
for a while on one particular part of my book. I think that's one part of why it's taking me so long to be able to gain momentum on the second book is that it's, for whatever reason, it's just really hard for me to get past this particular chapter.
mm,
And I'm a perfectionist. So I always want everything to be perfect, which I know the point of a first draft is it doesn't need to be perfect, but
mhm.
it's hard to kind of change it's hard to change that mindset, but I'm working on it. And at some point, I'm probably just gonna go in the document and say, "This is a future me problem," and just move on so I can at least gain some momentum on that. It's it's just been hard because I actually got a notification from TikTok or something that I had posted a video. This was a month or two ago that I got this that a year prior I had posted a picture of me being at the exact same spot and writing this sequel, and I was just thinking, "Oh my gosh, this this is unacceptable." Actually, I'm used to being so productive,
Mhm.
particularly with my schoolwork, because I do work so hard to be as productive as I possibly can. And, that's helped me get a 4.0, but that's also kind of made me lose sight of giving time for me to actually like give time for myself. And so I'm getting a little bit better at maybe taking a step back a little bit and trying to work some me time into that. So I'm hoping that at some point very soon, I will get into a spot where I can finally dedicate some time to writing the sequel because I know people are waiting and it's already been over a year. So I'm sorry, y'all. as long as long as I'm not, uh, like, outpacing George R. R. Martin, I should be fine, right?
Honestly, I think most of the audience is going to understand. And I'll be completely honest. I've already added your book to my TBR. I'm actually going to be ordering it very soon in my book haul. And I know for myself,
You.
I am someone where when I look at a work of an author, I want to feel the essence of that author. So I actually want to ask you about this. You just mentioned that you are a bit of a perfectionist. Many of us are in some way, but at the same time, you almost have to have that perfectionist type of attitude because, well, at least when you get to your finished product, because if not, people will not be able to truly see the essence of what it truly means to read someone's work. How did you incorporate that into your initial book, A Race Against Shadows? Because was it something where you just knew the plot line and you were able to, you talked about how you were just following a character's journey, or did you have to almost slow yourself down in the middle of the process so that you could truly understand how can I put my full being into this work of art?
Um, well, first of all, on the perfectionism discussion, I think that yes, a degree of perfectionism is important to creating a story that you're proud of, but a reasonable degree of perfectionism is what is necessary because, I mean, especially with a book, like a book is never going to, there's no way that a book can ever actually be perfect, or any creative work. There's no way that it can actually be perfect, but it can be good enough to, as you say, for a reader and an onlooker to be able to see the essence of the person who created it. And so, but otherwise, if you go down the perfectionism route, I mean, you can just keep going over and over and over the book again, and that could just go into infinity. So
Yeah.
you need a stopping point. But
Mhm.
as far as how like my journey of writing A Race Against Shadows went, it actually was a really interesting experience because like I said, I I had a general idea of where I wanted the story to go,
Mhm.
but it did, the longer I sat with it, so I am grateful that it took me 5 years because the longer I sat with it, the more the story evolved. So it kind of went from, kind of the bare bones of pretty much the extent of what an 8th grader can create
Mm.
to something that I feel like, and I have had people tell this to me, that the world and the story does feel very unique and something that was a breath of fresh air instead of just retelling the same story over and over again. And so that, especially with the world building that I did, because that was one of the most fun parts of writing the book, was creating the world and the lore around it, particularly with the mythos and all of that. And it was just like every time I had an idea, I was like, wow, this is genius. I'm so good with this. But it evolved from, it was going to start off as one book and then it was going to be two books. And now we got a plan for five. So there's a first or four or five. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to end up yet, but the first one, there's going to be a first duology, and then there's going to be a prequel, and then there's either going to be a second, or there's either going to be a book that's set after the first duology that the prequel kind of sets up, or it's going to be a second duology. I'm not sure how that's going to happen yet. And then also I want to write a spin-off too. So see, that's why I got to figure out a routine because otherwise none of this stuff is getting written.
Yeah,
But
you've got quite the collection in mind.
yeah, I'm a little ambitious here.
That's good though. That's good. In fact,
Yes.
I want to touch on that because I did some research. The average age for someone to have their first book written, published, etc., is around 30. It doesn't say exactly what age, but from the research I've done, it's around 30 years old, whether that's 28, 29, or upwards of 34, 35. That's about the average age range that people get their first book out. How surreal is it that you have broken the grain on that to an unbelievable degree and you've been able to do it pretty much about a decade earlier than what the average person does? How surreal does that feel for you?
Well, that statistic does inflate my ego a little bit. But I mean, it's you know, it is a little bit surreal because it is, I have so much time ahead of me and to be able to tell the stories that I want to tell. And yeah, maybe that's inspiring a bit of a superiority complex. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But I have been able to interact with some people who are my age and who are in college. And I've also been able to interact with other people who are older than me. And so it's been interesting to build a community because indie authors are such a can be such a tight knit community and where we're all supporting each other and stuff like that. And so you can meet people from a diverse range of experiences and locations and all of that. And so I think that's what's been the most interesting part of being a young author in this community.
Yeah, you're free to have a bit of an inflated ego, just a little bit.
Thank you.
But but let's actually go a little bit forward into your book a little more. So I actually saw, and I've talked with a couple people who've read your book. Usually I see if I can find people who've read your book, and I've talked with a couple. One thing that came across from both of their perspectives was this idea of feminine rage and how you wrote a story about a girl who's trying to escape a king who used her as a weapon. The girl's name, I believe, is Istra.
Yes.
Did How are you able to get yourself to almost get into that mood? And what I mean by that is it, because I know for a lot of authors that I've talked to, a lot of what they wrote, even though it might have been completely different, right? And we're talking, they wrote a fantasy book that's just completely different from anything you would think would take inspiration from their life. But then when you look deep into their life, you realize that something was there that caused them to write this story. What allowed you to really take the essence of this sort of feminine rage and push it to the absolute limit in your book?
That's a really interesting question because I have always been fascinated with the idea of female rage and particularly rage that is born out of love. Uh,
Mm,
I'm also fascinated with the idea of a mother's rage. And I think that does stem from there are societal expectations placed on us women that we have to be demure and we have to always be kind and compassionate. And when you show emotion, oh, you're an emotional woman and stuff like that. And as I've grown older, I've grown more frustrated with the way that society treats women.
mm,
And so I think that as I grew older and as I was understanding the underlying themes of my book a little bit more, I
mhm.
was able to interweave that in there. And I mean, you see particularly a relevant situation that's happening right now is the smear campaign against Chapel Rowan. And you see that people there's a double standard with how male celebrities interact with paparazzi versus how female celebrities interact with paparazzi, because she acts with assertiveness and she's called a bitch. And sorry, but
No, I'm completely understandable.
yes,
Completely understandable.
then I mean the social media is just dogpiled on top of her for something that wasn't even her fault. But I saw this clip where, Tyler the Creator was threatening to run over paparazzi with his car, or Justin Bieber was yelling at them, which those are all valid reactions to people who literally stalk their every move and don't give them any privacy. When but the worst thing a woman can be is not kind in the eyes of the public. And then you see, I mean, at the end of my book, you see a character who is brought to her very limits. She's lost someone very close to her, and she's frustrated with the position that she's been put in. And she's desperate for a way to survive and a way out and a way to end the empire that has taken everything from her. And she's just allowed to unleash that rage and an expression of power, just a lot of power, because she's the magic wielding character. And I think it's very freeing to write a character like that who's allowed to actually set that feeling free.
Mm. I love that response. I love that
Thank you.
response. That was awesome. But I actually want to delve a little deeper into the world building aspect because I want to know how you were able to keep it all organized, especially as someone so young. Because, because for example, so one of my guests that I talked with recently, his name is Tim Fasciola, and his trilogy Vengeful Realm. He basically said I talked to him a little before the episode started, and he was talking about, oh my God, it was so ridiculous to try and organize because his brain was working at a million neurons a second. He was having to write the first book while at the same time he would get random ideas in his head to put into the next book. And then there was, oh, what about book three? And then on top of all that, he was purposefully going out and learning about all the different martial arts and weapons in different countries. So he was actually experiencing that for himself and having to organize all those thoughts. So eventually I got to the point where I had to ask him, bro, how? How do you keep all that organized? And I want to do the same thing with you because your book is basically a giant world building style of book. How do you keep everything organized between the story, the gods, mortals, elves, fays, witches, multiple kingdoms, and just all of that just organized? I guess that's all I can say.
Well, I'm gonna be straight up honest with you. There's really no organization.
Mm,
There is a lot of the stuff that's managed to stick in my head. Other than that, I have a bunch of random Word documents that have various things spread.
mm,
It's bad. I actually, so my friend T.M. Baylor, who is the author of A Forgotten Legend, I was asking her for some advice on how because her sequel, A Myth of Ancient, is coming out really soon, I think in April. And so I was asking her for some advice on how to get how to have continuity between sequels. And
mm,
she has some very helpful videos on her TikTok on what a book Bible looks like and what you can put in there. So I need to get around to taking that advice and putting a book Bible together and actually having everything organized so then I don't shoot myself in the foot. But yeah, I mean, there's slight organization. So I have a spreadsheet. I was reading the Silmarillion while writing this book, and because Tolkien has such an emphasis on languages, I got inspired to create my own languages in my book too, which is actually a lot harder than you'd think it would be. And so I have a spreadsheet where I've put in all of the different things because I was in high school Spanish class at that point, and I was like, this is, I kind of know the basics of how a language works, right? And now it's been like 3 years since I took a Spanish class.
Mm.
So we'll see if I can dredge up my memory of how that spreadsheet works. But yeah, it's organized chaos, I would say.
Organized chaos. I feel like that's every author. I feel like that's literally
Yeah.
every author.
Yeah.
But what has so you picked up writing at such an early age. What has that taught you about yourself as you've gone through elementary, middle school, high school, now with college? For example, I can give you my example. I was someone where reading became that thing for me when I was stressed. I could pick up any book, whether it was a self help book, a fantasy book, romance book, didn't matter. I could pick up any book, start reading, and m- my stress was gone immediately. Has reading taught you anything about yourself over the years that you just never would have found out if you never picked it up as a hobby and eventually turned it into a, a pseudo career, basically?
I think that reading and writing taught me that I could access my creative side. So I was always a high achiever, and I was always destined to be a STEM major basically. And they kind of tell you, they kind of present it to you that you're either a technical person or you're a creative person, and there's really no in between. And so I think I've been especially privileged to actually be able to access both sides of that. And like I was talking about earlier, I think that has given me some tools for navigating those sides. And so I think that's been a really interesting journey to be able to kind of walk the line in between my creative side and my technical engineering side.
We can put both of those together right now. I actually want to bring this up because I have no choice. This is one of the coolest things about you that I learned from my research, and I absolutely have to. We take both creative and technical, put them together, and we get an archaeologist, everyone. A literal archaeologist here. What got you into archaeology in general? I know on your TikTok, one of your pin posts, you talk about how you're big into the Mosasaurus in particular. You've actually
Yes.
done mild hunting in terms of archaeology in that way. Tell us about that because that that is so cool. I love it.
Yes. So I'm actually the fossil side of that is actually more on the paleontology side. Although the
That's right.
places that I do search at, there are artifacts and stuff like that. So it is still like there's the paleontology, amateur paleontology and amateur
Mm-hmm.
archaeology that are
Mm-hmm.
involved with that. And I've been doing that with my mom since I was in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been obsessed with dinosaurs since forever. I think my obsession with dinosaurs and my obsession with dragons are linked.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's lots of it's just so much fun. I'm just a huge nerd. This past Not this past week, but the week before, I was on spring break, and my mom and I we went up to our usual place that we go to. It's just this mostly dry riverbed, and actually not mostly dry because there was a lot of water in that one when we went up there, but it's just this huge riverbed. It's like 40 feet deep and 200 feet wide, and there's just so much ground to cover. And yeah, it's that's definitely one of my favorite hobbies. And particularly, I just think that mosasaurs are so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Again, with the dinosaur and the dragon and the like all of those kinds of things. I think that's kind of looped into that. I just like things with big teeth. But um mosasaurs are giant marine lizards. They're not dinosaurs. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I could go on about this for days, but I I'll spare
But,
you.
no, by all means, is there anything else you want to talk about, like in terms of things you might have discovered yourself in that? Because this is one of those things that I think you're the first person in my life that I've ever met who's, I mean, don't get me wrong, everyone loves a good dinosaur. All of us have seen the Jurassic Park movies, but but to actually meet someone who's going out there and hunting this, it's a very unique experience. It's something that I want to learn more about. So please continue on if you'd like.
It's really fascinating when I collect these fossils because you realize that you've picked up something that used to belong to a creature that lived tens to hundreds of millions of years ago. And it's just kind of a surreal experience because you're connected across so much time and space too. Because I mean, who knows where exactly that creature lost its tooth or died and decayed or whatever. And that goes for the artifacts too, because where I go, like I said, you can find artifacts there too. And some of these, they can range from about 1900 years old to 15,000. You can find things like paleo Clovis points and Dalton points there too. And what I think is really fascinating about finding something like that is that that's the remnant of an entire person's life. You're never going to know who this person was, but you have to wonder, what was their favorite color? Did they have a favorite food? Did they have kids? Were they a serious person or were they a funny person? All of their skill into making this tool that kept them alive because they were using that for food and all of these things to keep themselves alive. And I think it's just really fascinating to be able to be connected across so many years of time with these animals and also with the indigenous people who used to live in that area.
This all comes back to the fact that you call yourself a giant nerd. I call it extreme curiosity, which is an amazing thing to have, an amazing quality to have. But we live in a world, in a society now where curiosity is just kind of forgotten for the most part. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's there, but the world is just all about speed, efficiency, and how fast can you go from point A to point B nowadays. So there's almost no room in 99% of lives. Okay, maybe not 99%, but for the most part, the majority of people don't feel like they have the time to really bring out that curiosity side of theirs. Now, you may be 20 years old, but I think you definitely have some insights that could potentially help people on this front. What would you say to someone who wants to find that curious side of theirs? Because again, it's not common anymore, unlike way back in the day.
I think that, and this is probably advice that I need to take myself, but I think it's important to give yourself time alone with your thoughts. Like, for example, you're taking a walk and you're not listening. I mean, you could be listening to music, but you're not like on your phone or anything, or you're in the shower and you're just there with your thoughts. You can't be on your phone and you can't be doing all of this other stuff that you would otherwise be doing, or right before bed or something. Because I think that was something that really helped my story evolve, was being able to
Hmm.
have those moments of time alone with just me and my thoughts. But our our society has kind of pushed this idea of constant stimulation and instant gratification. And as someone who needs a lot of stimulus to is like visual stimulus in particular to kind of keep me going. That has been kind of hard, especially with like TikTok and stuff like that. I will admit I am addicted to social media, but it's kind of part of my job. I have to be on social media to market. But I think I do need to make a deliberate effort to go back and give myself going back and giving myself time alone with my thoughts. And I think a lot of other people could benefit from that too.
That was great. That was a
Thank
great
you.
answer. Holy.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's being alone with your thoughts. That is advice that everyone could use. But do you think that there are those that are just born with that extra curiosity factor, or do you think that that's something that people can just maybe not switch on, but eventually find the switch to?
Um, Absolutely. I think anyone can be curious about anything. And I think curiosity is less of a nature thing and more of a nurture thing, because my parents, particularly my mom, so my dad, he is the engineer and he's more on the technical side of things, and my mom, she's more of the sciency, let's go out in nature person. So I had both of these people who were huge influences on my early life. I build Legos and do snap circuits with my dad. And then with my mom, like we'd watch nature documentaries or go out fossil hunting in the middle of nature and all of that, and or go hiking. So I think they and how they handled my early years are responsible for my curiosity and where I am today. And but that's not to say that you can't learn to, like you said, you can't flip a switch to be a more curious person.
I want to piggyback to the fact that I saw one of your TikToks, you mentioned that you were at a specific event. I forget exactly what it was called, but I know it was a book signing event that was meant for women authors and so on and so forth. How did it feel to was that first of all, was that your first event? And even if it wasn't, how does it feel to be able to go to these places and see, just to get all of the community aspect, and then to see your books getting sold or taken away, put into other people's hands, and to be able to physically see a piece of your art having an effect on someone's life in some way or another? How does that feel for you?
Are you talking about the Stuff Your Kindle Day event that
I
I
think I think
took
that
part
might
in earlier this month?
I think that might have been I think that was it. It
Oh,
was it was a very recent event of yours, if I remember correctly.
so that actually wasn't an in-person event. That was where a bunch of authors came together and we put our ebooks for free for that
Okay.
particular day. Yeah, it's a Stuff Your Kindle event is basically what I just described. A bunch of authors get together and they put their ebooks for free for a specific time period, and anyone can go
Hmm.
in and just like look at what books they want and just, stuff their Kindles. That I downloaded maybe about 8 books just completely for free. So those are really great opportunities. I got 623 downloads from that event.
That must have felt great.
Yeah, that was crazy because I've never had at one time so many new people get hands on my book. I mean, when you think about the size of an auditorium or something, I think my general chemistry classes freshman year, I think the capacity of those was about 450 people. So if you add 150 people onto that, I mean, that's crazy. More, that amount of people now have hands on your
Mm,
book.
mhm.
And so I'm really excited for people to read my book, and I hope they really enjoy it. And that was definitely so worth it. And
Mhm.
for any readers, definitely keep an eye out for those Stuff Your Kindle days because they're such a great opportunity to grab so many books for free.
Have you had a book signing event at all that you've been to in person, or is that a goal of yours currently?
That's a goal. I
Okay.
haven't done any actual in-person events yet
Okay.
just because I've been so busy, but I do want to make more of an effort, uh, particularly this year, to expand beyond just social media in terms of marketing because I've been pushing the social media side of it so hard because that's what I've been able to do basically with the
Mhm.
time that I have.
Yeah.
But at some point, I'm going to figure it out. I still really have no idea what I'm doing.
That is very, very common for almost every indie author. And the fact that you are putting in the effort already at such a young age is incredible. It's almost unheard of to see someone putting in that much effort towards something. Speaking of goals, what are the goals for Jay Watson moving forward, going into 2026 and into the future? Because you're currently in college, and then you're also, we already talked about how you're trying to write 5+ books, turn this into somewhat of a series of some kind, duologies, prequels, sequels, etc. So, what is the goal for J. Watson when it comes to being an author moving forward?
Um, well, I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants right now
Mm-hmm.
because even though my book is a big priority for me, my academics are always going to be the higher priority because that's where my future lies. And because it's so demanding, I mean, like I said, I had so much time to write because the bulk of writing A Race Against Shadows happened when I had more free time at my disposal, which is ironic considering the fact that I had like 7 hours of classes a day and did a varsity sport and did like 5 clubs and stuff like that. But now it feels like I still have so much less time. And when
Mm-hmm.
I do have free time, I'm kind of so mentally exhausted at that point that I don't want to think
Mm-hmm.
anymore. So, like I said, I'm kind of just winging it. Uh, I at some point I do need to set some concrete goals for myself, but I'm just it's hard to get into a routine as a college student because as soon as you start getting settled, the semester's over. And I mean, my semester's over in like 4 weeks, which is insane. I feel like I just got here. And
Mm-hmm.
then I have this summer, and the summer is about 3 months. That's not enough time to get into a routine for anything because then you're back into the next semester. And so it's just really hard to get acclimated and to set an actual routine for something when everything's just constantly changing.
Which makes sense, but do you see yourself following n- a career as an author, or do you see it more like a pastime as you go through college and then move on with your life beyond that?
Um, it'll definitely be more of a hobby. I I'm gunning for the big bucks, to be honest. Let's be for real. But as an engineer, I don't know if I could ever really have the motivation to be able to write consistently enough to actually be able to support myself. And I want
Mm-hmm.
to be able to support myself with
Mm-hmm.
an engineering degree because also it's not just even the money with the engineering degree. I also have a vested interest in, I'm an environmental engineering major. And one of my interests is being able to facilitate human innovation while also preserving the and optimizing the use of our natural resources. I'm particularly interested in water systems too. And I think that's really important work that's very relevant right now and that needs to be done. And like we need people working on that and we need women working on it too. And so I think it's just really important to me to be able to pursue a career in engineering. And so writing is probably, at least as of right now, it's going to stay as a hobby for me.
Hmm. Which is completely fine. We'll definitely enjoy seeing your works as you can put them out. But speaking of your being an environmental engineer, obviously you've talked about how nature in general. You've done a lot in regards to that. And I know you said your mom in particular was always taking you out and going to different areas. You would always search for fossils and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Is that where that deep-seated love for nature and the environment really came into play? Or maybe was it a certain event that caused you to have that feeling of, yeah, this is where I want to go?
I think it was definitely the former because, like I said, also along with my mom kind of being on the science and nature side of things and instilling a love of that in me, my dad, he instilled a love of problem solving and figuring out how things work and engineering in general in me. And so I thought that environmental engineering was an interesting intersection between those two ideas because oftentimes I think technical innovation and preserving natural resources are seen as mutually exclusive. And, but I don't believe that's true. I think there's a way for us to continue evolving as a species while still making sure that we have our natural resources available to us. And I know that I'm just one person, so I can't, I can't just solve that issue. But I mean, if I can just, you know, work a little bit along the way and make a bit of an impact, that'll make it worth it.
Looking back at your life, you have quite the life. We've talked about it so far here. How do you think if you could talk to J.A. Watson in the fourth grade, what do you think how do you think she'd feel about where you've gotten to so far?
I think she'd be really proud of me. I think particularly because it was such a struggle for me to be able to stay committed to one project. I think that younger me would be proud to see that I had followed through with with creating my physical book.
Mhm. Here at Authors by Us, one of the biggest things we're looking to do is have every single person who tunes in walking away feeling like if they sat down with you at a coffee shop, they could be your new best friend that you could just talk to for hours. Unfortunately, though, we can't learn all of that within the pages of a book. So, what is one major thing that you would want the audience to walk away from this knowing about you that they probably won't find in your books?
Oh, oh, that's a tough question. I like that. Um, I think that I think my book has my book has a bit of a gritty tone, you know, and but I'm not a really gritty person. I like to have fun. I go to sports events at my school and I like to do fun things and I like to be funny, which I think those things have kind of inadvertently slipped into my book a little bit, probably. And I think that when you write a gritty kind of a book with a darker tone to it, there are some lighter parts in there, but I guess maybe you'd be able to overlook. I'm just 20-year-old girl.
Mhm.
I do 20-year-old girl things. I have fun. I hang out with friends. Like I
Mhm.
went and took pictures in blue bonnets with my friend yesterday. You know,
I was real quick, I have to ask about this because it is kind of funny because we talked about earlier how your the character that you wrote went through this rage phase where she hit her limit and she had no choice but to just almost, you could say, snap. And many people look at that and immediately think the author in some way has that kind of feeling, and yet here you are talking about how you're still just your everyday 20-year-old girl who wants to go out, have fun with her friends. But is there a part of you that almost resonates with Istra? Again, I believe that's her name.
yes.
Within your book, is there almost an autobiographical feel, just even if just a little bit, from your main character to yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, I tried to avoid making her a self-insert character. Particularly, I made her like 6 feet tall and I'm 5'1". So I was like, we are beating the self-insert allegations today with this 1 foot height difference. But I think that inevitably your your experiences and your personality are going to leak into your characters. And like I was explaining earlier, I think a lot of my frustration with being a woman in a continually restrictive society has kind of also bled into the character of Istra a little bit. And then also Istra's grief, because I've had some experiences with losing people who are close to me within the past couple of years.
Mm.
And so she's a character that I've been able to really resonate with because I've been able to write my grief through her, or at least if I haven't really been writing, I've been able to conceptualize my grief through her. And I think that's really cathartic.
So then, overall, what is this? Has this book cost you anything in terms of emotions? Because how, or not even has it, but how much has it taxed you emotionally to write this, if it had that personal effect on you? And then, by the way, I'm sorry about whoever it is that you lost, but you said that you lost people and that bled into the pages a little bit. How is that? How much has this book been also kind of an emotional tax, but also an emotional relief and healing?
I really wouldn't even look at it like an emotional tax because I think being able to channel your emotions, like strong emotions like anger and grief and sadness, I think that's really important to be able to deal with those feelings constructively instead of lashing out at other people and or self-sabotaging your life. So I think it has been more on the emotional relief side than it has on the emotional taxing side. I mean, it has been because I've channeled a lot of myself into Istra in particular, because no surprise, she's the favorite child. Uh, it's like a you ask a mother who her favorite child is, and she's like, "Oh, I don't have one." It's Istra. But I have several other main characters. There's her sister Nira, and she's
Mhm.
a very different character than she's a very different perfect person than me, and she's a very different person than who you usually see as a female character in a story like this. She's very selfish, she's very explosive, she's very strong-willed, and you have also Ivy too. She's the rogue princess. She's a very compassionate person. and very introspective and a very observant person.
Hmm.
And you have Cal, who's a little more emotionally reserved, and he's also a man. So that's also a different experience to write in the headspace of a man as a woman, as I would imagine it would be to be a man writing a woman as well.
Hmm.
And so it's been interesting and it's been challenging to write in different headspaces because I chose to do a multi POV book and you want to make sure that each character is distinctive.
Yeah. So then how did you get into those headspaces? Did it come down to research? Did it come down to talking with friends? Did it come to what really allowed you to get into that? Because I know talking with many authors, that's pretty complicated to do, especially depending on the characters you're building.
I think a little research was definitely involved. And then also, you know, creating mood boards to be able to visualize your characters. Like I have Pinterest boards. So creating mood boards and doing commissions to give yourself a visual idea of the character. And then also creating playlists to finding songs that you feel would resonate with the characters. I think that also really helps you to get in the headspace of the particular character. Like I associate more angry, explosive songs with Nira, or there's also an intersection between Nira and Istra in terms of kind of being these fiery personalities. So that kind of gives me a better understanding of their dynamic, their very complex dynamic as sisters, too. And so I think there are a lot of different ways that you can give yourself a visual and an like an auditorial idea of who your characters are as people to be able to get yourself in the headspace to write them.
Awesome. So, one last thing I want to ask you here, real quick. When people close your book for the last time, they've gone page one to end. What's the feeling that you want them to have besides just, hey, did you enjoy my book?
Well, I kind of want them to go, holy shit, what's going to happen? But um I think also it was really important to me when writing this book because 3 out of the 4 POV characters are women. I think it was really important to me that to be able to write women that had their own strengths and weaknesses. Like I was saying, Nira's selfish, but she's also very strong willed. Or Ivy is a little unsure of herself, but she's also very compassionate and she's very well spoken. And Istra, she has a lot of self doubt and but at the same time she's very determined and she's very loyal to those that she loves. And so I wanted to represent that. I wanted to show that femininity is not a monolith. Femininity is expressed in many different ways. We women are all different people. We all have our unique experiences and our unique personalities. And while I do think that media is getting better at representing that idea, I think we're still lacking, particularly in the epic fantasy sphere. I think we're still lacking a lot of these prominent female characters that are different people. And because I also I want all of my readers, but particularly my female readers, to be able to resonate with at least one of the characters.
That's awesome. Where can people find you at?
You can find me at author J.A. Watson on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads. Those 3 are what I'm most active on right now. You can find my book, A Race Against Shadows, on Amazon and also on Kindle Unlimited.
Awesome. I want to thank you so much for coming on, Jay Watson. This has been awesome. I've absolutely loved this conversation. I'm quite interested to see where your life goes because you've got quite the quite the next few years ahead of you between you trying to write multiple books and finishing off your college career. But again, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm just looking forward to seeing how things go for you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for this opportunity. This has been a great conversation. I've greatly appreciated the questions that you've asked.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Authors by Us closing thoughts section, where we talk about some of our favorite moments from the episode, and I get your guys' thoughts on it as well. Today's conversation with JA was awesome. I think that she's a very interesting person, and the level of creativeness that came out of this episode was hilarious because we went from writing a book to paleontology to just so many different avenues of creativity. And with that, I think the first thing that I want to talk about in particular here was the way that she connected her idealism of getting an engineering degree with the fact that her writing her book and how many people don't think about engineering as being good for that. Because when you look at any sort of engineering degree, like she mentioned in the episode, people tend to think about problem solving. They tend to think about very technical in terms of the way they think. But the way that she spoke about it was this actually helps because you're able to find that middle ground and you're able to use those problem solving skills and those technical skills alongside that extra creativity that you may have in order to push it further. And I think that is so interesting because again, many people believe that you're either technical slash analytical or you're creative and you have this sort of kind of ADHD brain, right? And you're always just trying to make new things. And that's how most people look at life. They think that they may not be creative because they're a very technical thinker. They're always someone who's trying to solve problems directly. But JA's example is a phenomenal one of showcasing how you can be anything technically. You can be someone who thinks in a very technical, analytical way and still find a way to bring creativity into that. And she was able to do that with A Race Against Shadows. And then now as she's writes the four other books that she wants within the series, she'll be able to utilize this degree even more as she writes those books. So overall, I think that was just very interesting because it kind of the fact is you can find that middle ground. And I think this applies well for me as well because I never thought that I was going to start this podcast. I really didn't. And I mention this all the time how I love conversation, I love reading, and those are kind of my two major skills, major things that I love to do. And I never thought that I would have the capability of starting a podcast, even though I loved podcasts for years now, a few years at this point. I have watched at least 2 to 3 podcasts a week. I absolutely love listening to conversation. I love having conversations. And so it became almost a dream of mine to make a podcast. But for me, I'm someone who also believes that they are very technical, very analytical. And so I didn't think that I would be the type of creative that would be able to not just build a podcast, but then be able to improve it over time. And what I've noticed is as I've started this podcast, I've been slowly trying to figure out how can I improve it. And I think my creative my creativity has just nudged up little by little because of that. Because now I have a passion, I have something that I'm pursuing that I really, really want in terms of building this to be one of the biggest podcasts on the planet. And so now I'm trying to figure out, okay, where can I go from here to improve anything, whether it be the production of of the podcast, whether it be how do we build out our short form content strategy. I even want to build maybe even a secondary channel, or maybe use the main podcast YouTube channel as a way to put out maybe some mid-form content that's 3 to 8 minutes long. I have so many plans that I want to implement into this podcast. And it's one of those things where when I first started, I didn't think about any of this. But now, as I've been going, that creativity has just been going up little by little. And it's been forcing me to find ways to see if I can improve the podcast just that little bit more. So I absolutely love that point with JA and how she found that way of being technical while creative at the same time. And her engineering degree acted kind of like a catalyst to be able to help find that. Now, of course, she just needs to find more time to be able to write these other books, but that'll happen eventually. We already know she's going to drop those books soon. And when she does, I'm going to be there. Moving on, though. I talked about, for the second thing, I talked about how she's 20 years old, yet she's done something that 99% of people will never do. I want to go one level deeper with this. And in particular, the lesson I want to talk with you guys about that I found from this is age does not matter. The amount of times that I have heard someone say that age was a reason for them to not be able to pursue or achieve something. If I had a nickel for every time I've even heard that, I'd have a lot of nickels. Let's just say that. Because on the one hand, you'll have people saying that I'm too young. For example, it could be with anything, whether it be life advice, whether it be business advice, whether it be really anything. You'll have people that are young saying that they're too young. No one would even give them the time of day because they're too young. But then on the other hand, you have people saying that they're too old to pursue their dreams, right? They get the feeling that it's too late for them. And I think this episode is a phenomenal example of showcasing. I mean, JA was literally in, what was it, 8th grade when she started writing this book, A Race Against Shadows. So when you think about it, that means that she was around what, 14, 15 years old when she started writing this book, and then she published it when she turned 20. Again, the average person finishes their first book, their debut, on average around 30 years old, 28 to I believe it was 35, according to my research that I did. That's around the average age that these people will get their book, their debut written and published and all of that. And yet she's done it nearly a decade in advance. The fact is, age should not matter, and you should not be looking at age as the predetermined thing that means that people are not going to appreciate you, people don't care, or people won't give you the time of day. The fact is, you just need to be willing to go for it. And if you can show that you are willing to go for something, people are going to be a lot more likely to listen, even if you are too young or you are too old or whatever, right? The fact is, age should not be the determining factor here. What should be the determining factor is you have a goal, you want to pursue it, and nothing's going to stop you from getting that goal pursued. So the third thing I wanted to talk about real quick here is the way that she talks about women being represented today. And even though I will say that this can really depend on who you ask, but I definitely see her point of view. I think from my point of view, I understand where she's coming from because of the fact that there are a lot of tropes. We see it in reading, we see it in life, we see it in everything. And when you think about it, when we think of rage, for example, in her book, she wanted to bring out this sort of feminine, motherly style of rage. And when you think about it, we don't see that a lot, right? A lot of the time, whether it's in media, whether it's in books, whatever, when you think about rage, you tend to think about men, right? Because that's how it's been portrayed for centuries. And it's something that you don't see very much when it comes to women. So this is something that I definitely understand her point of view on. And the fact is, it is portrayed that way, that as women or as a woman, you are to be delicate, you are to be kind, you are to be nice. And those are kind of the tropes that we see around the world. Now, granted, again, that really depends on the communities you are in. Let's be real here. But the fact is, that is the common trope. And I think it's interesting to see how she was able to bring those frustrations out and incorporate them into her book, into her character. And I don't know, I'm very interested to see how that turns out when I get my hands on A Race Against Shadows. It's one of those things that I don't talk about very much, but I definitely understand the point of views. And I'm someone who likes to feel flexible when it comes, not in terms of point of views, because obviously, if I have an opinion on something, I'm going to shout that opinion. But at the same time, I like to think that I'm fairly open minded and that I want to understand how other people think and what they believe. Because if you're not willing to have that style of thought process, then you end up feeling very stuck in your own head compared to being able to experience new things or experience other things or other people and what they believe and so on and so forth. So overall, I definitely see where her point of view comes from, and I'm interested to see how she was able to portray that within her book once I get my hands on it. But with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Those are just a few things I wanted to briefly discuss here. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this episode. What were some of your favorite moments? And with that, I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'll see you all next time.